Welcome to the Bucher and Friends podcast. Here is your host.
Let's send it over to Rick Bucher.
Rick Bucher.
Welcome to another episode of Bucher Friendless, subsidiary of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast network. I'm Rick Bucher. You can read my stuff on Bleacher Report and on Twitter at Rick Bucher, and you can follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Bucher Friends. And if you enjoy the show, please drop us a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Screenshot the review and tweet it to us at Bucher Friends, and you'll be entered for a chance to win some swag from myself or Ryan Hollins or Will Blackman, my other podcast mates, if you will. All right, as mentioned, this is another one of those episodes where I'm going solo. Part of that is because I'm on the road and my responsibilities working for Bleacher Report and doing the stories that I do sometimes makes it difficult to get guests on in an expedited manner. And this is one of those times. It's also, there's a couple things I wanted to get into and I needed a little room to breathe. So, item one, it's not often we get conflicting reports from the same news outlet. But that's indeed what we got in the last few days from ESPN when it concerns Jason Kidd and his candidacy to be the Lakers' next head coach. Adrian Wojnarowski, he of the notorious Woj bombs, and Stephen A. Smith, who, in the words of Tony Kornheiser, is mostly a yodeler now, though still has enough ties inside the NBA, his former beat, that he can break a story now and then, offered opposing views on Kidd's chances of being the Lakers' next head coach. Now, before I sort this out for you, both what to believe from these contradictory reports as well as why we're getting contradictory reports in the first place, I wanted to address something that we all seem to be leaping past. Something that is wrecking both sports and the business of covering them. Something that I was at the Pistons-Nuggets game tonight, and one of the scouts there and I had this very conversation. Both came up with the same thing. So let's start with this. Has anyone asked Luke Walton what he thinks of Jason Kidd's candidacy to be the next head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers? If he has anyone he'd put ahead of Jason on that list, or who or what he would credit for Jason simply having his name connected to the job? Okay, it would take guts to ask the man who holds the job what he thinks of the man rumored to be a candidate for it. It would undoubtedly earn you a concentrated what the bleep look at the very least, and there's a good chance Luke might just walk off shaking his head. Wouldn't be all that shocking if he went all Kevin Durant on the reporter. But are we really that far away from that happening? I mean, we had Kidd actually on air with ESPN being asked about his candidacy for a job that is currently occupied and which the Lakers have not given any public indication is soon to be available. Now, a lot of people were banging on Kidd because he talked about it. He answered the question. But the fact of the matter is, we're asking the question. Is it really bad form for him? Or is it bad form that we're even going down this road and openly talking about who might be the next head coach? Openly talking. I mean, it's one thing if there's rumors and there's backdoor conversations and you're talking about it with your friends. But it's another thing when there are reports about this. And there are TV shows where the question is being asked. So, look, I know the rumors have been out there for months. Hell, when the Lakers' grasp on a playoff spot started slipping, I had a source tell me the Lakers were considering a change, and that at that time, Kidd could be Luke's replacement. I was even told that LeBron was sitting out at that time for an extended period to force the Lakers to make a change, and that he was good with Kidd being the new man. And I just talked to another scout tonight who had no doubt that there was a point this season in which he believed in watching LeBron and watching him play and watching the Lakers that he was trying to get Luke fired. Wouldn't be the first time. So I was told that LeBron could have come back sooner, but he was forcing the Lakers to make a change. And it never happened, apparently, for two reasons. One, Byron Scott got wind of Jason being in the mix and called Magic asking how he could hire someone who had cost Byron a job. And understand, it was deeper than Byron believing Jason had led the coup in New Jersey despite Scott coaching the Nets to back-to-back NBA Finals appearances. It was that Jason had cost another black man a position of authority in the NBA, those jobs being in rare supply for people of color. That was the betrayal that Byron apparently has had a hard time letting go of, and one that was hard for Magic to ignore, especially since Lawrence Frank, who was white, ended up getting the job, being Byron's successor. There's a lot of talk about the unwritten rules and its bad form that Jason Kidd would talk about a job or his interest in a job that is still being held by another coach, and the suggestion that he did the same thing when it came to Milwaukee and Larry Drew. But there's also the unwritten rules that I haven't heard a whole lot of people talk about, maybe because they're not aware of them, that when it comes to men of color undercutting other men of color in a business where it's difficult to get a spot, that is a much, much deeper cut. So when Jeannie Buss then made it clear she didn't want to kick Luke to the curb, at least in part because she didn't want to feel as if LeBron and his agent Rich Paul were running the franchise, the flashpoint passed without a change. LeBron returned to the floor, Luke kept his job, and Jason started looking at other options. When the report came out about Ty Lue being a candidate, I went back to my source and asked him about it. He confirmed that if and when the Lakers made a change, Lue had a better chance of getting the job than Jason. As for Doc Rivers moving down the hall or Rick Carlisle leaving the Mavericks, there's one question that needs to be asked first. Why in God's name would they? This is where Jay Kidd's desire to get back in the NBA is a little too obvious. Here's what he said about anyone considered for the job.
I think when you look at the Lakers as a whole, it's a franchise that is one of the best in the world, not just in the NBA, but the world. And so if you ever have the opportunity to wear the purple and gold, you can't turn that down. As a coach, as a player, because they're all about championships. And so they have a process. They had a young team, and then LeBron comes and kind of sped up things. And so, he wants to win now. But I think, again, it takes time. And I thought, again, Luke was doing a great job at coaching those young guys and LeBron for the first year.
Now, that shouldn't apply either to Doc or Carlisle. And my man Mark Stein is the one who reported that the Lakers would have interest in Carlisle. And that became a big headline. I don't fault Mark for that, but of course they have interest in Carlisle. You know who else they should have interest in? Brad Stevens and Steve Kerr and Mike Budenholzer. I mean, there are any number of coaches around the league that they should have interest in. That's not news. The news would be if one of those coaches wanted to come coach the Lakers. Let's be realistic here. Lakers, historic franchise in a great city that will continue to be a great city and a draw. But they're not in a good way right now. And this isn't a plum job. No offense to what Jay is saying. At least not for those who may be in a better situation. Now, the only way Doc considers it is if the Lakers throw a crazy contract at him and give him the front office control he had to give up to stay with the Clippers, which would force him to be a hypocrite about how much having two roles was too much for him, but we've seen worse. As for Carlisle, there's no way he's giving up his situation with the Mavs for the Lakers. He's one of the smartest coaches in the league, not one of the dumbest. Yeah, he plays a mean piano, and he sat in with Bruce Hornsby in concert, but by no means is he an LA guy. Even if he were, why would he trade working for Mark Cuban, who is an involved owner in all the right ways and is all about getting players Rick wants to coach and want to be coached by Rick? Or trading the chance to develop Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis for what? Presiding over the overhyped young talent the Lakers have and what appears to be the approaching decline of LeBron James? That is not a mixed bag I can imagine any coach wanting to hold if he has better options. And both Doc and Carlisle certainly do. Which brings us to Lue. Now, I don't have an update on his health or his eagerness to get back and coach. Most guys, you wouldn't even have to ask the question. But Ty isn't really an LA guy either, even though he started his playing career there and won 2 championships. Here's the brutal truth for the Lakers right now. Getting LeBron was supposed to be the tractor beam that pulled in all the other elements the Lakers might need to compete for a championship. I never saw that as a sure thing, but that was the fervent dream of both LeBron and Lakers fans. It's hard to see that happening now. The tractor beam is weakening, and even if it weren't, the necessary parts don't appear to be readily available. Even for those who have accepted all along that this might be a throwaway year for the Lakers, it was with the belief that right about this time they would be getting ready for the playoffs and their young core would be getting the experience of playing meaningful games both in jockeying for a playoff seed and in the postseason. Instead, they're once again playing out the string on a losing season. And what did they gain? Experience? No. Chemistry? Don't make me laugh. Growth on the part of their young players? Name them. Here's the harsh reality. This season for the Lakers has been one big fat zero. And it's likely to go sub-zero once the season ends and they begin their coaching search, if only because they'll be entering another unknown. Keep in mind, Lou didn't develop a team in Cleveland. He had 7 guys on that first roster with double-digit experience, the one that won a championship. That's not what the Lakers have. And it's hard to see how they'll get that by next season. Now, one of the rumors I've heard is that the Lakers will make a deal for Kevin Love, bringing in both a vet with playoff experience and great familiarity with LeBron. I don't know how serious that is. Reading the tea leaves, I mean, it makes sense. Try to put the band back together, and Love is an LA type guy and knows how to play with LeBron, but does that excite you? Does that make you think that LeBron and K-Love are going to take the league by storm out of LA? I mean, maybe the Lakers imagined recreating what LeBron did in Cleveland, but there's no way they planned on recreating literally what he had in Cleveland. I don't know if I'll be more or less friendless after this next item, but I've seen the light. I've been converted. I've crossed over to the other side. I now have a deep and abiding admiration, not only for what James Harden is doing this season, but how he's doing it. Now, anyone who's followed my work knows that my definition of playing the right way, and imagine that being said with air quotes, is not the standard, don't force the issue, always pass to the open man one. Certainly, I'm not down with players who jack up shots because they want it to be all about them or overestimate their abilities or just don't know how or care to get the most out of their teammates. But there's a middle ground wider than most people seem to realize between the two. And James Harden right now has clearly found it and is comfortable in it. Now, isolation basketball does not fire my imagination quite the way a flowing offense such as the Warriors at their best does. Nothing, including Aaron Gordon or Zach LaVine dunks, thrill me more than 2 teammates reading each other for a cut, a pass, and a basket, whatever it might be. That is the true music of the game. And it makes me jump around the same way as a band in a groove. But that doesn't mean, and this is where I found my new ground, I can't appreciate the genius of what James Harden is doing. And I didn't get there right away. Look, it's a hard watch at times. Now, I've heard plenty of you complain that he's just tricking guys into fouling him or tricking the refs into thinking he has been fouled. He's rigged the game in his favor because you either have to let him shoot or risk sending him to the free throw line to shoot. Either way, Harden is getting up shots. To which I say, you're damn right he's rigged the game in his favor. But this is what you're not taking into full consideration. Every player in the NBA is trying to rig the game in his favor. Every one of them is. They just are not as good at it as James is. Look, I've been following the Pistons the last few days and watching Blake Griffin in particular. And while he's certainly not looked at in quite the same light as Harden, he is just as quick. This is one of the things that I saw. Again, Pistons Nuggets, watching the game. He's just as quick to recognize when a defensive player has put himself in a position to draw a foul. You can see it hit their cerebral cortex like a lightning bolt. Oh! And the instant he sees it, he's driving or going up for a shot and drawing contact. And it's not about actually taking a shot or driving around that defender. It's all about, defender's in a compromised position. I'm going to take full advantage. I'm going to run into him. I'm getting some cheap points from the line. There's not a player in the league that won't do that given the opportunity. Just vast majority just haven't figured out how, or don't quite have the requisite ability physically to do it. Now, we think about tricking the refs as being primarily the domain of players with the ball, but it's actually happening all over the court, every game. We just, as viewers, the tendency is to focus in on the ball, and understandably, that's where generally the action and the entertainment is. But the dance of rebounders in particular, trying to make it look as if they are being held or surreptitiously holding an opponent, happens on every possession of every game. There's an art to it. Guys don't just fight for position nearest the basket to be the first to the ball. I mean, let's face it. What's easier? Beating 9 other guys to the ball or making it look as if one guy is illegally keeping you from trying to get to the ball? You have your answer. So I earned my newfound respect for what Harden is doing, in part after talking to a variety of players about the MVP race between Giannis Antetokounmpo and Harden. And by the way, it's universally agreed upon in locker rooms, NBA locker rooms, that it's between those two. You can give a tip of the cap to Nikola Jokic or Paul George or anybody else, but in the view of players, it really comes down to Giannis and James. Now, it's interesting when I ask them about that battle and what they see those two doing, and much of this is fed off the conversation I had with Steph Curry a couple years ago about MVP. He said, and we were talking about the politics of it, because I've been doing this for a while. Karl Malone ultimately won an MVP, won his first MVP because everybody thought it was time. He had been good for so long, and you just got it was one of those narratives. It just began the year, and that was a year that the Utah Jazz were good enough, and all the pieces came together, and so the story was created. That happens in the same way that Steve Nash was in line to win 3 consecutive MVPs, and his third year was actually his best. One of the earlier years, Will Barton from the Nuggets was one who clearly remembers how one of the Nash MVPs should have been Kobe's, in his mind anyway. But nonetheless, the voters, I'm convinced, had it in their minds that, we can't put Steve Nash in that rare air of 3 MVP awards. He's good. He's been good. He's not that good. So, anyway, in talking to players about Giannis and Harden, when they describe what Giannis is doing, they immediately go to what the Milwaukee Bucks are doing. Their first reason for Giannis being the MVP is always, look at what the Milwaukee Bucks are doing. And literally, a couple guys have said this directly, and they've said it exactly like this. I mean, look at what the Bucks are doing, and look at Giannis' stats. Now, that is basically connecting dots. That's 1 + 1 = 2, right? It's completely different with Harden, though. They admire what Giannis is doing. They're amazed by what Harden has done. They just shake their heads, and they're like, whew, historic. I mean, they feel what Harden is doing. And it's not what the Rockets are doing. That's the great distinction. It's, man, Giannis is an MVP, because have you seen what the Bucks are doing? And then and Harden, yeah, it's probably Harden's, because look at what Harden's doing. They respect the Greek freak. They fear the beard. Because here's the bottom line. As I said, every player in the league would do what Harden does if they could. Every player in the league, one way or another, is trying. It's just that no one has figured out how to do it with the almost unstoppable degree of success that Harden has done it. And it's all generated by him. This Rockets roster is not as good as the one they had last year. Tip of the cap to Daryl Morey for putting some pieces together, picking up pieces. Kenneth Faried at the top of the list. Guys who have come in and made a tremendous impact, filled holes. Austin Rivers. I mean, they've made some nice additions, but they're flirting with the 3rd seed in the Western Conference because whether Chris Paul has been in or out, let's face it, Chris Paul is not what Chris Paul once was. Regardless of what they've put around him, guys on 10 days, whatever, he's going out there and he's putting up 50, 60 and just doing what he's doing. Night in, night out. And everybody in the league knows it's coming. Now, Giannis, I imagine, is the sentimental favorite, especially when it comes to the play the right way disciples. And sometimes they carry the day. I gave you a few examples already. It's how Nash and Steph Curry can win 2 MVP awards each, and Kobe Bryant only wins 1. In my lifetime of covering the league, the number of guys who have won multiple MVPs and the fact that Kobe Bryant only won 1, to me, will always stand as a reflection of Kobe just had this superior attitude and never cultivated a great relationship with the media. I mean, any of the other guys, Karl Malone could be salty, but I could go down the list. In fact, I'm about to do that right now. And actually, it's not so much guys who have won a couple, as there's certain guys you look at it and say, okay, it was because he had a very good season, his team did well, and he had a great relationship with the media. Dirk Nowitzki fits in that category. I'd say Kevin Garnett fits in that category. Allen Iverson, and go down the line. David Robinson, Charles Barkley. I don't know if you'd put Akeem Olajuwon in that category or not. Certainly respected, certainly had a great year. I don't know how close he was with the media. He was rather private. Russell Westbrook. Russell Westbrook simply, that was one where you simply couldn't deny what he did from a individual statistical standpoint. That carried the day. Again, is that the biggest reason? Should that be the biggest reason? Sometimes the guys just have years where you can't deny what they're doing. And I guess I can't make it any simpler than this. The Milwaukee Bucks have surprised everyone by posting the best record in the league. And Giannis is far and away their best player. James Harden is doing something no one else in the league has come close to doing. And as a result, a rebuilt on the fly, injury-marred Rockets team still appears to pose a threat to the defending champs. All right, that does it for this episode of Bucher Friendless, subsidiary of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast network. In the next podcast, I will be joined by Ryan Hollins, and we're going to address a topic that Will Blackman, our other podcast mate, suggested that Ryan and I explore. That being the realistic options for the next Zion Williamson should he decide not to let the NCAA exploit his talents for free. Where could he go, and how would it impact his eventual career in the NBA and overall marketability? We'll give you our best explanation based on Ryan having played overseas, me having covered overseas competition, and looking at the various options that people have. Not as great as you may think, but maybe growing greater as we move forward. All right, that does it. In the meantime, as always, thanks for listening.